afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are in the United States. I'd like to welcome you to today's presentation. My name is Lori Bedford. I'm with the Center for Faculty Excellence, and I have three of my colleagues here. Scott Bissell from the Center for Faculty Excellence. Scott, do you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone. Good to be with you this afternoon or this evening.
Thanks, Scott. Michelle Hadger from the Center for Student Success, specifically the library. Michelle, do you want to say hi?
Hi, folks.
Thanks, Michelle. And finally, Cheryl Keene from the Riley College of Education and Leadership. You want to say hi, Cheryl?
Hello, I'm a faculty member, and I know some of you. Happy to spend the hour with you.
Awesome. Thanks, Cheryl. Our webinar today is titled Engaging Presentations, Creating Interactivity in Face-to-Face Instruction. And our goal here today is we know that all of you will be presenting at residency sometime in the next 6 months. And we also know that we have observed many, many good strategies for interacting with students and creating engagement and just having a very interesting and informative session that results in some pretty positive learning outcomes. We want to support those efforts and try to give you some additional ideas because we know it can be difficult to present to large groups of students. It can be difficult to present some of the material in the way that it's given to you. And so, yeah, again, we have some great subject matter experts, Scott, Michelle, and Cheryl here, to give you some of their insight in face-to-face teaching. But before we begin, let's just do a little bit of housekeeping. The next slide there, Scott.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so if you've not been in a webinar before, or if you've not been to one recently, a few things that you should know. First of all, you should see the control panel as it's shown here on the screen. If you don't see this entire control panel and you just see the smaller piece, what you want to do is click on this little orange arrow. It's highlighted by a red box. When you click on the arrow, then that will toggle the entire menu so that you can interact in the webinar and use all the tools. You can adjust your audio as needed. If you're having some trouble hearing or want to just make sure that it's optimum, you can go ahead and adjust those settings using the tool that is highlighted by the red box. You can do that anytime during the webinar. You won't interrupt us and we don't hear that. We'd also like to invite you to participate in the webinar by asking questions, and you can do that in a couple of ways. First of all, you can type questions into the questions box that you see there. The other panelists and I will monitor that and will share your questions and answer them with the rest of the group. Note that everyone is muted. In GoToWebinar, we find that there can be a lot of background noise, and that can be distracting and difficult for people to hear. So we keep everyone muted, but if you have questions, be sure you type them in. We can also have you visit with us verbally. You can raise your hand by clicking the raise hand button right there that you see the cursor on, and the little red box is around. And then we can see that you have something to say, so we can unmute you and have a conversation with you. So a couple ways you can participate. GoTo does offer technical support. The number's on the screen. If you need that service, please feel free to call them. And I'm not sure, is there closed captioning today, Scott?
You know what, I think since this was a pilot group, I don't think we have closed captioning for this one.
Okay, yeah, so sorry about that. If you were needing that feature, we apologize that that is not available, but there will be a link at the end of the webinar so that you can give some feedback. Okay, next slide, Scott. Few things that we want to accomplish today. We want to help you identify what strategies are most beneficial and most aligned with your style and personality for delivering a session. We want to help you to understand and be familiar with engagement techniques so that you can interact better with students, particularly in those large sessions where you have, maybe 100 students or more. And how do you interact with students when you have such a large group? We want to give you tools to manage the time and the room resources. You are we're stuck with what's given us at residency, and so there's many ways to capitalize on what is given us, and we'll talk about that. And finally, we'll just discuss some challenges that their participants, students at residency can give us, and talk a little bit about how we might respond to those sessions. Seen some of you folks do this really well, so I think you might recognize some of the strategies that we share with everyone. Go ahead, Scott, and advance the slide. We want to start here. Are you going to launch the poll, Scott, or do you want me to do that?
I will go ahead and launch it. I have it all ready and let's go.
Okay, thanks so much. Well, a little bit of information from you so that we can tailor our discussion to your needs. So first of all, we'd like to find out from you what area is most important to you. What would you like to take away from the session today? You can participate in this poll by just clicking right on the screen, and you can select one. There might be more than one, so select the one that is most important to you. We've got about half of the folks have voted, so we'll just give you a couple more seconds here to finish that up. Okay, why don't you go ahead and close that? Almost everyone has, oh, you already did that, thanks. You're ahead of me, Scott. So it looks like about half of us want to spend some time discussing those challenging situations, so we'll try to get to that as quickly as possible. A good section of us want to talk about engagement techniques. That's a big part of the session too. And we'll also then focus a little bit on those strategies to prepare for delivering and the time management things, which are important as well. The next poll, we want you to participate.
Muted.
I want to know if you are at this time participating in residencies. We know that we have folks here who
Unmuted.
who are participating in residencies, who are teaching at residencies, but we also opened the floor up to other people who might be teaching in a face-to-face environment or who might be presenting at conferences and want some information. So if we can just get you to share with us, yes or no, whether or not you teach at residencies. So go ahead and click on the screen, and you can share your current responsibilities with us too. Okay, just about everyone has voted, and yeah, almost all of us do teach at residencies. We have one or two folks who don't. So if you're joining us and you are not teaching at residencies, please just take this information and apply it. I think it works in any face-to-face setting.
It seems, Lori, that maybe one person out of the 20 or so has not done it yet, but is a newbie. So we welcome.
Oh, okay. Is that the case?
They don't have to raise their hand, but maybe.
Okay, yeah. So if that's the case, so if you've not taught at residency before, this is a good introduction. Thanks for that clarification, Cheryl. The last poll, we would like to know what your role is at residency, and so what team do you represent? Do you represent advising, library, writing center, career services? I think that we hit them all, but if there's another support service or area that you represent that we didn't include, so go ahead and click other, and then if you would put in the questions area there, let us know where you are from. Excuse me. Just give you a couple more seconds here to vote. We're pretty, almost everyone has voted.
I know at least one of our members is feeling sick today, and we might just say if you go to residency and you're feeling under the weather, that what we're saying here might be particularly taken into consideration about ways you can engage people so you're not having to talk all the time.
That's right. Yeah, I'm waiting for my throat to go too, Cheryl, so I'll take you up on some of your suggestions. So we have a lot of folks from the Writing Center. Welcome. About a quarter of us from the library. Welcome to you folks. The Career Services. Welcome to you. Nobody from advising. So we have really the Center for Student Support folks here. So welcome. We appreciate you coming. So with that, what I'd like to do next is just share, the four of us, our presenters and I, have some experience teaching face-to-face, and I guess it's our advice, it's our wisdom, however you want to call it. But we're going to share just a brief little snippet of our story. So Cheryl, would you like to start?
Well, I'm enthusiastic about this. If any of you have ever seen me teach, I'm pretty extroverted, and I've been pushing the limits at residency, and it seems that every time I sing, like I make up songs that are about resisting plagiarism, or if I'm talking about staying healthy, I'll get down and do push-ups. Anyway, so I've been trying to figure out how to bring engagement and energy into the room. And also when I'm a participant in somebody else's, I just want to push to use the faculty in the room, and we're going to talk about how to do that more deliberately, because I think it increases the level of energy in the room, and also this sort of sense of, I think, socialization for the students.
Okay, thanks, Cheryl. How about you, Michelle?
Well, I'm coming from this from a perspective that I've taken about 300 personality tests, and I am a scientifically confirmed introvert. So I'm coming from the other side, natural introvert, came into my career with a huge anxiety for public speaking. And I also just want to endorse that all of the strategies and best practices we're going to talk about today are things that I can personally say have helped me sort of realign my own mindset, reduce my own stress, I'll come back to that a couple times, and really just help me be a successful presenter. So if anyone's in the audience feeling like, well, how do you just stop being nervous? I promise some of these strategies will actually help you stop being nervous.
Thanks. Good insight, Michelle. I think many of us are that way, and I find that many of my colleagues who teach online and work remotely really have some of those characteristics. So we'll look forward to hearing more about that. Scott, would you like to share a little bit?
Sure. So way back when, in my early part of my career, when I first started doing presentations and training sessions or meetings, and this also will, for those of you who might be extroverts, it's not just introverts that it can be difficult for. The extrovert side of this was I was so nervous to get through all my content being in front of a room that I would go as quickly as possible and find a way to be done in 5 minutes, even though the learning outcomes would be met or the information may not be as well communicated. So it took me a lot of time to learn how to build in examples, connect with the audience, so that way, the information was presented and learning outcomes were met, depending if it was more of a presentation or a training session. One thing that if some of you all are nervous about presenting, when research is done asking what people's top 10 fears are, public speaking actually is often at the top of the list. So if you feel nervous about public speaking, you are not alone.
Thanks, Scott. And lastly, I would just like to share that, my piece of wisdom, if you would be, is that less is more. Sometimes as instructors we have this long laundry list of content we've got to get through, and we feel like if we don't get through every bit, every piece of information we want to share with students, somehow they're going to be lost. But at other times, we miss out, if we do that, we miss out on engaging conversations, those stories, those personal stories, showing students how to apply the information, some real active learning, engagement kinds of things. So sometimes if we don't hit very comprehensively on a piece of content, we can give students resources and we can tell them how they can learn more about a topic. So we don't have to hit on every bit of information on every topic, but let those emerge that are most useful and most relevant to our students. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to a little bit about the agenda first. So we're going to talk about preparing for a session, how to engage our audience. We're going to talk about those challenging situations that many of you wanted to hear about. And then we'll talk about a few strategies for closing sessions. A lot of times that's really awkward. So we want to help you identify some ways that you can do that smoothly. So with that, I will turn the presentation over to my colleagues.
And Michelle, this is Cheryl. I just checked our engagement plan, and we had devoted a pretty hefty section of our time to preparing for the session, but that wasn't people's main priority, so
Right.
we can save the 5 minutes that the introduction may have taken longer.
Oh, yes, I plan to. I'm also thinking of Lori's less is more. Though I did want to go into this, and Cheryl, you kind of stepped on my joke. I was going to say I was going to fess up to not having the most interesting section of the presentation, but I will say that as we go into talking about planning, planning will help you develop engagement, which I did see that people were interested in, developing engagement, and sometimes just even being mindful of the idea and what you're doing with that helps you. I'll also say the hot topic was dealing with difficult classroom situations, and I have personally noticed that when I was earlier on in my presenting career and not planning and basically not doing very good presentations, I had crankier students in more challenging situations. The more relaxed I've been in the classroom and the more engaging my presentations, it doesn't solve every problem, but it can actually lead you on your way to success in those areas that were more interesting to you. But zipping along through planning. Planning, bottom line, I work with my peers and coaching them through this, but it is important to plan your sessions ahead of time, and we're going to actually start talking about things you can do well in advance. And we're sort of at the stage where you might even be designing or taking a look at a presentation and determining your approach. And tying into engagement, these themes are going to be woven together. I mean, a successful presentation, one where your students will learn something, take something away, is if it's meaningful and has that human connection with them. And we've already even brought that up, that socializing experience. So all these points on this slide, plan and think about how you are going to make students care about what you are saying. And I have found that for Walden students, it's the more you can do to overtly and repeatedly tie what you're presenting into things the students need and will use. How will it save them time? How will it help them complete a course assignment? How will it, help them with their capstone? How will it help them graduate on time? You got to weave those in. And something really important, I know I have a lot of my colleagues in the room to remember, even at planning, is that I'm a librarian. I can walk into a room and be ready to teach a database search engine and just leap into it. And I know the logic to me is obvious, like why I want to teach students this, because they need articles, going to do a paper, going to need resources. But for our students, I've noticed that you got to take them by the hand and walk them down the path. So make it very clear. You can't just lead off with teaching a database search, and not to pick on the Writing Center, but to teach on APA, because they're not going to automatically think, not every student is going to think, oh, I need this. If you can apply it to something concrete that they can do. And do that frequently throughout your presentation and planning. I mean, it's not just something you sort of intro with or maybe paste on to the end. Repeatedly find opportunities to bring it back to the student so they know why they're using every single bit of whatever you're teaching or demonstrating. And Scott, if you'd go to the next slide, as you're planning, right, what we have on this slide is an engagement plan. And some of the things we were talking about, making it meaningful, plan out where you're going to put in those moments of meaning and moments of connecting with your students. Now, one thing I learned personally even, is that these sort of plans, this is not a script, this is not a straitjacket, this is not having a timer out, and I had to learn that down to 30 seconds, the last 30 seconds of 10 minutes, you know exactly what you're going to be doing. You don't want to do that, because I promise that will make your session more robotic. And drawing back to that whole strategies for reducing your own personal anxiety as a presenter, if you think you have a script that you have to follow in a very exact way, that's also just going to increase your anxiety of everything you need to keep track of. What you do want to have is just enough structure to make sure you hit all the valuable points and objectives and outcomes that you need to hit. You have a structure to help you keep on task and on time, but it's it's a loose structure with room to breathe, and you plan in engagement and room to breathe. You plan in talking, like you can see on ours, talking to attendees, running polls, question and answer times, work them in throughout your presentation, and build in sort of a loose model with flexibility. So it's another important thing with planning. It's not about scripting, it's not about rehearsing down to the second, but finding a way to build a flexible plan that will lead you through a very more human and engaging presentation. And talking about being human and engaging, Scott, if you could go to the next slide. We have this graphic for working with your personal style. Again, I realize this wasn't everyone's hot, wonderful, sexy interest, but it is important just to think about presentation style. One thing we did in the library that I think was very valuable and was at least hopefully a fun read for some of us is we looked at some of the best practices literature on presenting. We read a book together called Presentation Zen, and it contains a sort of advice about how do you use your voice. Plan on, and we're going to talk about practicing a bit too, plan on, you know, when will you talk? When will you take breaths? When will you pause? And how will you use your voice and work with the room movement? You will be in a room face-to-face with human beings, so think about you know, ways to practice and plan with how you're going to use your body. When are you going to stand by the podium? When might you go stand by a whiteboard or the screen? When might you go walk among the tables and work with people? And this is a little less about planning and more just about being mindful, and I'm going to come back to practicing in a minute. But you do also just be aware of how you can do that, but also work in your personality. I mean, there are some best practices, you know, clear speaking, slowing your voice down, taking breaths, making eye contact. But it's also important to find ways to work in your personality to a presentation. And one point we wanted to talk about is when you're thinking about engagement, how can you work in stories, how can you work in narratives, and how can you work in a bit of humor to your presentation? And that is something that, again, it can take a little bit of planning, practice, possibly peer feedback, because there are ways you can be very successful with that, but there are also danger zones. One piece of advice we wanted to work in is that all of us working together as your presenters love the idea of using humor, but we also realize it can be a little dangerous. There's humor that's sort of absurd and fun, and there's humor that might actually make people feel bad. So you got to be careful about humor that might, you know, be teasing your students, possibly bring in some negative feelings for your students. You want positive feelings. One interesting thing I've seen is if you're not careful with your humor, if you're too self-deprecating, I mean, there's lines. I like to joke about being a library nerd, and that usually can get some laughs out of some audiences, but, you know, it's usually in a positive thing. Oh, I'm such a nerd that I can help you. But then there's some types of humor, maybe you're having a bad time with technology and you start joking like, oh, well, I just don't know anything, and man, these computers are just a mystery to me. You got to be careful not to sort of devalue your own expertise and make your students, again, sort of wonder why they're even listening to or why they should care. And these are all things you can work into an engagement plan and also practice. And if, Scott, you could go to the next slide. You know, think about something you had to learn in the past and how long it had to take you to get good at this. And this is the old story. I mean, practice makes perfect. You have to try things out. Me, man, I'm still working on making really good omelets that aren't like weirdly crunchy on the outside, and I'm still practicing that. And yeah, you definitely have to practice your presentation skills. If you're a newer presenter, if you're a nervous presenter, that can be useful to you. If you're working with a session you haven't done before, definitely practice it. And Scott, if you could even go to the next slide. See, I'm not taking your time with this boring part, but it is really valuable, and especially because we have so many team members here in this room, you know, so many colleagues in the library, Writing Center for and Career Services. The value of practicing in front of other people is so incredible. I'm not saying our practice was perfect the first time around, but the library had a great opportunity in 2010 when all of our sessions were being redone anyway, I actually asked all the librarians who presented at Residencies to take turns doing peer presentations. And I had folks get up in a meeting room in the Minneapolis office and present an entire residency session in front of some other librarians, but just as they would do it for students, with all the breaks for exercises, with taking questions. And this was valuable because when you actually doing something live is where you discover where you're going a bit long, where you might have a joke that doesn't work so well, when you have potentially a demonstration that might be streamlined or work a bit better. And if you can do it in front of peers, that can be really good. They can give you that feedback on what you're doing, what they're seeing with you. But even just doing it in front of your cat, if necessary, just to get that feeling can really make a difference. So I just zipped through quite a few things. Let's stop for questions for a moment. And I do see that Lisa Cook typed in a question. I hope you don't mind if I read it out loud. She asked, when you have 150 students plus and their prior knowledge is at so many levels, how do you tailor to each student's needs? Challenging question, smiley face. Thanks, Lisa. It's a very challenging question. I mean, you know, we are going to talk a little bit about engaging practices in the classrooms. And so, Lisa, do you mind if we sort of come back to your question? Cheryl has some really good bullet points on that I think really fit well with your question. All right. So we'll come back to that because I know we actually did talk about that a little bit in our planning. Any other questions from folks? You can type them into the questions bar. All right, I don't see any, and of course we'll keep an eye out. Scott, if you could go to the next slide. So these are, I'll go through just real quick because we're right to get to Cheryl's section on engaging strategies. But again, with preparation, sort of moving from planning ahead of time and being prepared on the site. Just a reminder, getting to places, getting to your room early on site can help you build a foundation for success in a couple ways. One sort of obvious on the slide that we're talking about, you know, make sure everything works so you have plenty of time to fix anything that doesn't. But even more important, being in the room early so that you're there to greet your students and greet your audience can be an important foundation with the engagement that Cheryl's going to move into. First off, you know, I've had several students thank me and say things like, it's so nice to see a presenter who's in the room and has everything set up and is here sort of to talk to people when they come in. So one, your students will see it and appreciate it. It just helps you have that professional, welcoming air. Two, you can do things like circulate among the room, you know, sort of a foundation for the answer to Lisa Cook's question. Make sure you have the right people in the room, make sure they're coming to the correct seminar, get a feel for what programs, what levels, start saying hi to people. And, you know, Cheryl, I know we'll come back to this, but you can also find, you know, faculty colleagues in the room, which can be useful for reaching out to them to do some sort of pre-planning on, you know, how you're going to handle student questions. Can the faculty help circulate the room? And I know Cheryl's going to talk about that. So, Scott, we'll go to my next slide. And this is moving from sort of having a plan ahead of time and into sort of the real action. But these are things, again, to keep in mind as you plan and get ready. And I think the most important thing on here is, you know, this presentation and everything sort of in the room and your slides are to support you reaching out to your audience and making a connection. So on the slide, there's some of those tips that I'm sure a lot of you have heard before, but I just want to underline, like, this can be really important. Standing rather than sitting way back behind a podium so that you're visible and feel connected to your audience. Moving stuff. Again, if you get to the room earlier and your podium's in a weird spot and you're just sort of, they've set you up to be disconnected, you can move things around. You can request them to move the mic, move where the wires are. Get yourself where you're going to feel comfortable but also connected. Be prepared, you know, to face your audience and oh, please don't read your slides. You know, again, that's not a very human interaction, having someone read a script. You want to be prepared to talk to your audience, work with them, keep your face to them, and all of that kind of stuff. And as we see, adjust content based on attendee experience level. We've modeled that a little bit here, and you know, you can sort of feel it out as you're taking questions throughout the session. And one little tip I loved to, it's not required or potentially endorsed by my other colleagues, but you know, putting in a question and answer session really early in your session, or even starting with it, sometimes can help you get that feel of attendee experience level. So I'm about to pass to Cheryl to talk more now. We've sort of walked you from planning to being in the room. She's going to talk about engagement. Melanie posted something in the questions, so I'll just share that with the audience if Melanie doesn't mind. And she's endorsing that practice is good advice, and she said she's personally, just paraphrasing here, she's realized how much better success she could have had with some sessions if she's only planned. And she says this is coming from a salty veteran. Take time to plan. So thanks, Melanie. So Cheryl, I'll let you go ahead and now get into, from the plan into the live in the classroom engagement strategies.
Okay, thanks. And Scott, if you could unmute Nicole and Rachel. They're going to add points to this, and I think I've got about 5 minutes to keep with our schedule here. So, you know, one idea, like from with Lisa's question about how to get people engaged, well, you work the room like an extrovert, you know, and you sort of checked in about people are in the right place, what their questions are. Once you're starting, you can also do a hand-raising thing. How many of you are here to learn such and such? And go through a list of a few things, get a sense of where they're at, and also what you've done by doing that. Have you got their attention? Everybody likes to participate, so it's a very sort of small thing. Or you know, using the sort of device of, you know, turn to your neighbor and tell them what you want to learn, so that you create an anticipatory set for the people that are sitting there, so they're sort of now ready and listening. And if you find that the audience is misaligned with what you're going to do, you could quickly sort of remind them where those resources lie. Like, students are crazy about the webinars in the Writing Center when they realize they're there, so you might have that screen up right in the beginning and say, if I don't do for you what you're looking for, remember you can go here and find more resources. So Nicole, you're there. Do you want to pull something from this list and talk about? No, maybe that didn't work.
Yeah, Nicole, so I have unmuted your microphone if you want to try.
Maybe some of you.
Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. We have two Nicoles. I unmuted the wrong Nicole. All right. There we go.
Oh, Nicole, our fine librarian, who I just saw teach beautifully about 4 or 6 weeks ago.
And now that distracted me enough to forget what what you asked.
Okay, you just hang on there and let me do another one of these, and then you pitch in for something you've been exercising and doing. So because I am partially deaf and wear hearing aids, I'm really sensitive to if my participation level going down when I can't hear. And we all know student questions are a big risk, right? We want to engage them, but if everybody can't hear, so just to be patient, slow it down, get the mic in front of them, or repeat it, what they've said, and so that they're drawn in. And if there's a lot of hands in the air, you can sort of, you know, scan the audience and give eye contact and say, yes, I see you, I'll get you. So there isn't a sort of, you know, urgent hand raising. Okay, Nicole, anything that you think you do to get their attention?
I guess kind of each of those, I always try to repeat questions that are asked because I know it is hard for some people to hear them, and if I just answer something that nobody heard, it doesn't help anyone else in the room if they don't know what I'm answering. And I guess maybe part of to help my antsiness, if I see hands go up, I do acknowledge them because I want them to know that I've seen them and that I'll get to them so they don't feel like they're being ignored.
Yes, that's good. That's good. That's
which
good.
I think helps maybe kind of, it helps prevent any of maybe the more anxiety from the students and kind of bad interactions with them as well.
Right, good. Let me talk about inserting activities. Some of the research on attention says that our attention span's about 18.5 minutes. That's why a lot of slideshows, and documentaries are, short. So what can we do to insert just a little activity so they're not having to just concentrate on a presenter for 18 minutes? And again, that could be just turn to your neighbor and articulate what you've learned or what you want to learn, or as we do often, a little writing exercise. Scott, could I have the next slide? And I've asked Rachel in advance because I roped her in. I saw her come into the room and I said, could you help me present Rachel Grammer, our wonderful lead writing folks? So if Rachel, if you've got something on this list you could speak to, I saw you teach just on Friday at the faculty meetings, and you did a wonderful job.
Yeah, well, thanks, Cheryl. It's been really fun being in sessions with you. I'm just thinking we keep running into each other here. I know when I've had student questions come up, just looking at this list in particular, it is really easy to spend too much time on an individual question, and so often I'll either, I'll actually kind of deflect the question and say if it's something really specific to, for APA, if it's specific to your paper, ask me afterwards or come in during advising, and I'd be happy to help you out with that. Or if it's something that could be kind of pushed to a more general question that would maybe affect other students, I'll try to reframe it in a way that, that will allow other students to participate. And actually, if you go back to the last slide, there was another one I wanted to comment on, linking relevance and expertise in your session. I actually really like to ask students for their tools and their advice and things that have worked well for them, especially in sessions that I use when sometimes we'll talk about note-taking strategies or things like that in the Writing Center. And so it's really fun to get them involved by asking what their experiences are, and that's part of, I think, engaging them, but also allowing them to be kind of the experts and learn from one another.
Yes, that's great. So that the peers are modeling for each other. Well, if that student did it, I could do it too. Right. The back to the next slide, Scott. And I liked your idea of generalizing. So, it's kind of like public speakers or media people are trained to political people, particularly, to take a question and then have, answer the way, to make the point you want to make, but to not get too lost in the specifics of a student's question and not let a student hog the floor by asking more than one question or follow-up questions, and just say, oh, we're all available down there for advising, and make sure students know how to find your peers down in the advising room, so that it's apparent that you're not there to answer detailed questions, but meet everybody's needs. Everybody will feel taken care of, or the 99% of the people in the room. So that was my time, Scott. We want to go on to the next section?
Yep, great. Nice job with managing your time there, Cheryl. So now we want to move over to talking about handling challenging situations that will often come up in your room. And to echo what Michelle said, oftentimes spending more time preparing the level of engagement, work in the room, getting to know your attendees can head off some of these negative situations from happening, because a lot of them can just come up because people in the room might get distracted or be focused on something else. So if you have them engaged and they're staying with you, they might be less likely to exhibit some of these negative behaviors or these situations come up. So a few things to keep in mind is anticipate your questions and resistance that may come from your attendees. If there's something regarding your topic that's recently come about that is controversial, plan ahead of time of how to handle that, so that way that can be addressed in the room. Questions that will come up, be ready to handle those. A good thing to think about is look through your presentation and think about, if you were a student, what questions might you have. So either be ready to answer those or incorporate them into your session. Beware of a negative group. So there may be, you can kind of see maybe a table in the room or a part of the room. They just look like they're negative, like they're working on something else, or that just doesn't seem like a happy group. So one thing you can do, and I'll talk about this from two different standpoints that you can do this, is stand near the table. Oftentimes just being in proximity to the group will get them to realize that they should change course and be focused on what's being presented. If that's not possible, say perhaps if you're presenting on a platform and you can't kind of come down into the audience, this is a really good thing to engage your faculty members beforehand. So ask them for their help ahead of time. One thing that I've done in the past when it's been a larger group is my colleagues that I might be co-presenting with would know that if I made eye contact with them and then moved my eyes to a certain part of the room, they knew that there was something going on in that room and they would intervene for me if it was a situation where I couldn't get to that group. Another thing you can do is assert yourself with the individuals. Maybe ask them to share, if you're talking to a particular topic, get them to share a particular thought on that. Now, what I would not do is don't go specifically to the individual, putting an individual on the spot, because that can then just increase the negativity of the situation. Instead, just ask someone for this table just to share something or an example of something you're presenting about. That way you're not putting them quite in the spot, but you're addressing the situation and refocusing them. Really, the key is to refocus them onto something else. If they do share their negative thought, they might share their negative thoughts with the group. One way to pivot that so that you're not the one who has to necessarily be the bad guy or deliver it is get their colleagues to react to it. If you know a group that's more on focus with that, get the others in the room to see what they think of the thoughts from the negative people. If they're just continuing to be negative, what you may want to do is ask a faculty member to take them out of the room and handle the issue. So you could say, for example, so-and-so seems to have some concerns about this. Dr. Smith, would you maybe have a discussion with her in the hallway about this so that she can get her question addressed and we can continue on with the session. That way, whatever is going on with them, you can handle that situation and it doesn't take away from the larger presentation. Cheryl, did you want to say something there?
Yeah, I just want to add, I think in my experience of watching so many of you teach, since that's what faculty do at residency often, is it's not so much that the students' affect is negative, but they're just talking on, and they don't understand that what they're saying is just a little too personal. So in that sense, a faculty member can just drown them in attention in the hallway and perhaps meet their needs.
Have good clarification, Cheryl. Okay. So another negative situation is you may have students who are unengaged. It might be with the situation where they're really talking a lot, or maybe you just don't think that they're focused on what you're discussing. This is, again, where you can pull in that part of the room who's been quiet to participate, so to pull them back in. Try and pull in engaged participants with that. One thing is get faculty to help you. They can be circulating the room. Perhaps when you're doing activities, they can walk around and help participants or students stay focused on what's being discussed, and get your faculty to help you with that. A good way, you'll work that out ahead of time with them to ask for their help in doing that.
And as Scott switches to the next slide, if people could type in any challenging situations you've had, we may not have anticipated them. So help us out here.
Yes, good point. And we can talk with our panel of presenters. Another thing that may come up is a student points out incorrect information, maybe something you just presented. Sometimes we get outdated with things. We can mistake things. Something may be true for one program but not another program, and sometimes we're just not aware of all that. So recognize that it's helpful that they pointed that out for you. Do provide the correct information, or if you're not sure if they're accurate in what they're saying, offer to look into it for them and get back to the group. And then if it was that you have incorrect information that you presented, do make sure that you correct this for future sessions. So let's see if we have any, before I go here. Give me one moment, I seem to have lost my go-to window. Okay, let's see if we have any challenging situations.
Kayla shared one that I could read out for you, Scott.
Sure, that would be great.
Wrangling. Yeah. Kayla said, I've had students get really negative about faculty experiences during APA sessions, and even when I try to steer the conversation elsewhere, that convo tends to build momentum in a room of frustrated students. Any tips for those kind of situations?
Oh, you mean like faculty who are too full of themselves, that kind of?
Kayla, and I wonder, and I'm going to say this while you're typing, I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah, they start complaining about other faculty they've had in courses who have inconsistent APA advice, and they just Is that sort of what you were, yeah, Rachel said faculty who gave wrong APA advice. And Kayla says, yeah, that's it. You know, when that happened to me at my most recent residency, I was able to get basically saved by a faculty member in the room who stepped up and was a voice of authority giving the answer that I would have turned to, but sort of laid down the realities of, you know, in any university, you're going to have the quirky faculty, and they're humans too, and one of them, you know, we might have a faculty that just has quirky APA rules, and, you know, they got to decide, can they just get through the class and then just learn proper APA and keep working forward from the dissertation, or are they going to, you know, get hung up on that and sort of not move forward? So in short, I was really happy to have a faculty member in there to sort of kind of just tell them to calm down about it. Any other advice from folks?
Yeah,
Lori, you know, one thing that I would say is then to challenge students to become experts of their own in APA. When I was teaching, if I, you know, would give students the wrong advice on APA or anything, and they would come back to me and say, well, I looked on page such and so of the APA book, and here's what I found. You know, I appreciated that. Students can do that in a respectful way and just demonstrate that the knowledge and skills that they have, and have a conversation with the faculty member, and help that faculty member understand why they did the things that they did in APA. And I think that empowers students and helps them understand that, you know, they need to work in collaboration with the faculty, and you know, that there's some give and take.
and another way to handle it would be, you know, those folks like me that were trained as a teacher, we were taught to say, oh, that's a great question, or, oh, you presented a quandary, isn't that great? Or trying to love the questions and to say, well, remember, what, you know, our superordinate goal here is for you to figure out how to get information, not necessarily that I'm passing you, you know, absolute, or anything in this room is the, you know, absolute truth. So, you know, go out and triangulate your data, listen to other people, and understand, too, that you have to work on building relationships with faculty while you're pursuing a greater understanding of the truth.
And just to say, Melanie Brown from the Writing Center wrote in a comment that she agrees with Lori and reminds, you know, that you can also say, in addition to going to the manual, students can work with the Writing Center, and the Writing Center has also sort of helped students talk to faculty, I believe.
Okay. A couple other situations came up. So another challenge, though, Michelle, Cheryl, and Lori, if you have thoughts on these. So one challenge is residency materials. So as presenters, you know, we don't get to create the materials, and sometimes it's difficult to feel confident about those materials, particularly when there are errors in the content that we can't change. Any tips?
I'd like to address that if I
yeah,
can, because this is something that we've talked about for a long time in residencies. And for those of you that have been teaching for a while, you know that there was a point in time when you got the material and where you were told, do not deviate from this, this is what you need to present, and it was basically presented to you like a script. And Malika and I and the rest of the residency team has really talked about that and really have backed off on that. This is a script, this is what you need to say, this is what you need to do. The spirit of the content now is that it is the content you need to cover. And so you can do that in many ways. You know, you can do activities, you can ask questions, you can ask for, you know, some collaboration from faculty members, whatever fits your style and your personality, using some of the strategies that were talked about early in the webinar. I think one of the challenges that was talked about was if something is wrong. If something is blatantly wrong, then say, you know, this is wrong. You know, a citation should look like this. If it's something that is more in the gray area of a variety of perspectives, I think it's fine to say this is one perspective. I would like to share another perspective that I have. Share that. And then say, is there anybody else in the room who has another perspective? Students at residencies need to understand and need to be able to tolerate that not everything has a right and a wrong answer. Not everything is yes or no. And those conversations are good for students to hear.
Okay, Great. Thank you for sharing that, Lori. Two other questions, and then we'll move along. So Brittany asks, I'm curious to know if any of the presenters have advice on how to avoid being patronizing to our particular population of students. At Residencies, we work with students, not high schoolers or undergrads. Some of these strategies, like calling in the quiet part of the room, for instance, feels a little bit inappropriate for our particular audience. It seems the way to engage this is to be sure we are providing information that is useful to them and that they understand the usefulness rather than employing gimmicks. Quiet students may just be paying attention. What do you think? So one thing that, and I think that's a good point, is, and it's so much, I think the technique is effective, but sometimes it's the way you use the technique. If you are consistently asking for questions, getting participation around the room, but also keeping an eye on where there might be quiet spots or groups may not seem as focused, and you mix them in, the students are not going to realize that that's what you're calling on them, because they look like maybe they're focused on something else. So they won't realize that if you do that with them. And the other way is you could do a slightly softer approach if it's a quiet group, and just ask for this part of the room. You say, we've heard from other parts of the room. Anyone over here, is there anything else you'd like to add to the conversation? So ways that you can kind of soften it a little bit so that it fits with the audience. Cheryl, anything else you'd want to say on that one?
I mean, I hear what you're saying about patronizing, and most of us actually don't have time to do much calling on them. But if you have a section, after 20 minutes of them listening to you and you're trying to get participation, is to, if you do all these things, like Michelle said, you're not going to have a disengaged, itchy audience, right? They'll be relaxed, you'll be relaxed, but you want to keep people engaged. You can say, now, how about somebody at this table? Or as I've often seen the librarians do, is like, somebody call out a topic and I'll practice, Google Scholar with it. It may seem like a trick, but it works, because all of a sudden there's somebody in their room who's taken a risk, and other people start to get very interested.
And,
Cheryl, I think that those are really good points, and I think the other thing that could be going, you don't always know why people are quiet. The other thing that could be going on, and I think that it behooves us to read our audience. People start to become quiet. We notice that they're on their phones or on their computers or even having side conversations, and we're, in air quotes, I'm saying losing them. Be cognizant of that, and that goes back to what I said about less is more. If we're losing students, if they're bored, if it's the end of the day, if they're ready to go home, and we see that, it doesn't do us any good to just get through the content.
Right.
So at that point, you might think about, how can I change this up? Can I ask a question? Can I solicit input from the students? Can I have them have a discussion at their table? Think about something that you can do to bring them back, and rather than just think you have to get through the content, think about what will be most meaningful.
Or even get people to stand up and shake around a little bit if you have 2 sessions in a row in the same room.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I would say, in general, losing attention generally gradually happens over a few minutes of time. It's not an on or off switch. So if you're building in that engagement on a consistent and regular basis, you'll be less likely to get to that low attention for many.
And just one more thing. I mean, I think Brittany was even thinking about the student who is, laser eyes on you, laptop closed, paying attention, but, do you have to make that person talk? Well, no, you don't have to make them, but if you're feeling uneasy about that still, I mean, a student who sits quietly and really listens still won't learn as much by the research as a student who listens and participates and asks questions. So, we're not trying to torment them, we're trying to help them reflect and get involved with the learning a little bit more.
Okay.
And one way to address this is that some of this, makes you sort of weird you out, is to ask one of us, you've got a lot of colleagues that come and, sit in your session and then give you feedback after you teach. Mm-hmm. And, that's the way we learn to teach. Team teach.
Great. Well, really good, challenging situation. And thanks for...
Scott? I'm sorry.
One last point, and we'll have to move on.
I just wanted to check in. Lisa Cook asked a question in my section, and I kind of punted her to this section. So I wanted just to check in to see if Lisa Cook had her challenging situation of an extremely large room with many levels, if she sort of saw some strategies she could use, or she wants to revisit that question at this time. And she probably needs a point. I don't know if while she's typing, I was going to say, I think we've talked a lot about generalizing questions, getting peer feedback, all of those. And Lisa Cook just mentioned the fixed nature of the slides, but of course now Lori had some advice for that too, that if there's something else you can do with your session, she's a resource, and we have some flexibility to do that too. And Lisa, just one more thing I would add in. Sometimes we face that in the library, and sometimes at the beginning of my sessions, if I by experience know it's going to be an issue, I sometimes just preface the session saying, we got a lot of people with a lot of background. You might know some of the things, but hopefully someone will learn, each of you will learn at least one new thing, and maybe we can do some peer sharing for the folks who have experience in different areas. So sometimes you can even build that into your engagement plan as well.
Okay, well, thank you, Michelle. So once you get to the end of your session, you want to have a strong finish. You want them to leave with their questions answered and ideas that they can move forward with based on your topic. So a few ways you might do that. We did this halfway through, but we'll do this one again since we're towards the end of our session. And I'll ask you, what questions do you have? So any additional questions at this time, if you would send them in. And we do have one question that came in a couple minutes ago, but I wanted to save it to make sure we would have one for this area. But Anne asks, what about situations in which a faculty member undermines a presenter intentionally or not? And Lori, I'm going to throw that one to you since I know you work a lot with the Residencies team. Is there guidance on how they handle if a situation happens like that?
Those things happen, and, some people think about how to deal with those things, and they go more smoothly than others, and we're never going to prevent all that. But I would say as some advice is to minimize those kinds of things. Meet with the faculty members who are going to be in your room beforehand. Talk with them. Let them know how you'd like them to participate. Say, well, when I get to such and such a section, I'd like to call on you and ask you for examples. Would that be okay? So pull them in beforehand, have a conversation with them beforehand, so that, you have a little bit of an understanding. And again, that's not going to create, it's not going to totally eliminate, but it will minimize those kinds of things. And if it's an issue that, is something that we need to address, then come to someone on the academic residence teams, and we'll try to make sure that as we move forward, things that go a little bit more smoothly. Go ahead, Cheryl.
And I think it's really important. You don't know who these people are necessarily. Get the mic early on and say, could all the faculty in the room please come and introduce themselves to me? Or email them in advance, but it's sometimes hard to figure out which ones they are, who would be coming.
Yeah, very good. So another technique that you might use is to summarize the outcomes of what you covered in your session and ask for any additional thoughts from students. I'd like to ask Michelle, would you demonstrate this technique for the group?
Yeah, and so our learning outcomes for this presentation for you were to identify strategies preparing for delivering a session, which we talked about. We talked about integrating that practice and preparation. Engagement techniques were a huge part of our discussion, and we've shared a whole bunch of techniques. We talked about managing time and room resources. Wasn't a high priority, but you can see we worked it in a little bit with understanding your room, setting up your presentation, and as we just finished doing, our other objective was discuss challenging attendee situations, and thank you to everyone who's gave examples, and it sounds like we gave some strategies or at least some peer sharing to cover that as well. So those were our outcomes, and that's where our journey of the presentation went. And another thing you can do is request that a co-presenter give closing thoughts. Cheryl, would you like to?
Actually, if Nicole's unmiked, I've asked Nicole to make that point as a practitioner.
Okay,
and I've unmuted you, Nicole, so go ahead.
I'll give me 1 second. I just need to find her on the list.
I've unmuted her.
Oh, you did?
I'm unmuted.
All right, go for it.
I guess in sessions that I've done, I try to ask faculty to chime in when they can if they have anything to add. It seems to help, and the students kind of maybe don't pay attention to it more, but it reinforces things that we're telling them.
Great.
Thanks.
Well, thank you for making those points. I'm going to turn things back over to Lori.
Okay, we have just 2 minutes. I get to 1 minute to the top of the hour, and I'd like to finish on time. So here's a few books from Amazon. If you want to read some more about some strategies. We talked in generalities today, but there are ideas for many, many specific strategies you can use, and it will tell you exactly what to do. You know, my advice is to try things. Students don't know what you had planned, and if it doesn't work out, you know, you can, smoothly transition to something else. Students don't know, and who knows, it might work out really well. The other thing that I'd like to tell you is that if you don't know, I am the faculty specialist assigned to residencies, and so one of my duties is to help faculty members and staff, whoever's presenting, to talk through challenging situations, or if there's something interactive that you'd like to try, I'm happy to talk that through with you and to give you some ideas and to help you plan for that. If I'm at the residency, I'd also love to come in and observe you do that and have a conversation about that. So go ahead and go to the last slide, Scott. So we don't really have time to go through this now, but as you leave here, I'd like each and every one of you to identify one strategy that you're going to use at the next residency you teach at. I think everyone here is assigned to at least one residency in quarter 1 or quarter 2. So I'd really like for you to have one new thing you're going to try to engage your students. And again, if you have some questions or you're not exactly sure where to start on that, shoot me an email and we can have a conversation and get some ideas going. Any last thoughts, Cheryl, Michelle, or Scott?
I think what I'd like to ask, Lori, as a faculty is, are you going to make sure that in the next, quarter residencies that the people addressing the faculty remind them of their crucial role in the student support presentations?
Excuse me, as I talk to faculty and as I give those presentations, it's part of that. This is a pilot for this, and so we do need to find a way to integrate these and make sure that both faculty and staff are hearing the same message. So, yeah, that's part of the overall plan.
Thank you.
Great. Just one thing I would add, Lori, is this is more of a process than a one-time thing. You'll come to the training and be a fantastic presenter. You'll try different things out. You'll find some things work, some things don't work for you, and you'll gradually improve over time. But it is something that just takes time and multiple times up there to really make that progress.
Yep, I would agree. Just try 1 or 2 new things. Don't try to change everything up at once unless you're really brave. Just 1 or 2 new things, see how they go, and then go from there.
Yes.
Lisa's asking if the presentation will be posted, and I just want to say yes, I'll be sending out an email either yet today or tomorrow with a link to the webinar, a copy of the presentation, and that planning guide that you saw. And so you'll get an email. If your colleagues were unable to join us, they'll get the email too with the information. Michelle, did you have a chance to just give any last words?
I might just
happy to work with anyone who wants to chat about.
Yeah, and me too. I just want to
chat about.
Go ahead.
Oh no, I thought there was some lag. We got the idea. We're here. We're here as resources.
Yeah, when I send the email out, I'll send out Cheryl and Michelle and Scott's email. I'm just going to offer to do that. Pick their brain. They're very, very talented and very, very familiar with these strategies. So, draw upon your colleagues' expertise.
Yeah.
So with that, I got 2 minutes after the hour, and I don't want to keep you longer than necessary. We really appreciate your interaction. Lots of great ideas, and the sharing back and forth was really wonderful today. So I hope to see many of you at residencies in the next couple of quarters. If I don't, have a safe trip, enjoy your time, and say hi to all your colleagues. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye, everybody.